right, well, welcome everybody. This is a Kochava webinar event. We are back with the same pack from last time to talk more about SKAdNetwork with iOS 16.1's arrival in late October. We now know more than we knew in our last webinar that we hosted in August. So before we go through introductions, I wanted to dive right into some quick announcements. Number one, please submit your questions through Q&A and chat. We do have Mark Kellogg with us again, although he'll also be on deck today as part of the discussion. So he will try to answer some of the questions and our comments in there, but if we get a lot, bear with us. We hope to answer a lot of those potential questions in the content we've already prepared, but we'll try and get to as many questions as possible. The webinar is being recorded, so a number of people asked about that during registration. We've had a lot of people ask about it internally. Absolutely, this will be recorded. We will send a follow-up email to all of you who have registered, and that way you can get on-demand access to that and watch it. So don't feel like you got to screenshot the slides or take a ton of notes and miss out on the discussion. It will be made available to you. And last of all, follow us on social. We are posting all the time across LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter. So be sure to follow us, and that'll help you stay up to date and in the know. Next, let's go ahead and let's meet our speakers. Like I said, you might recognize this pack from last time, but I will go through introductions one more time. And Ethan, if you want to take us away, and we'll go from left to right here.
Awesome. Yeah. Hi, my name is Ethan Lewis. I'm the CTO here at Kochava. Been with the company for a little over six years or so. It's been a busy handful of months. Super excited to get back in and start chatting through some of the SKAD updates that we're seeing in market and what you guys can expect. So appreciate everyone joining and looking forward to it.
Hey, good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever this webinar finds you. My name is Mark Kellogg. I've been at Kochava for just about 8 years now, and I'm a product manager here. One of my purviews is SKAD, so happy to share some updates today.
Hi, everybody. I'm Hamilton Radcliffe. I've been here, I think I hit my 6-month mark. I cut my teeth in ad tech at a company called Datalogics and was there through the acquisition of Oracle by Oracle for 8 years, where we built large audiences and we did very complex causal lift analysis for campaign measurement. Been here again 6 months and settling in and looking forward to all the things we've got planned for next year, including SKAD 4.0.
Oh, yes. All right. Well, thank you, Ethan, Hamilton, Mark. We will dive in because we got a lot to cover, and we only have the hour. So first of all, one of the questions that we got during registration was just for those that are new to iOS app marketing, which, a lot of us have been living and breathing this stuff for a couple of years or more now. But we kind of wanted to just step back and give a lay of the land of what the state of attribution on iOS looks like. And I'm going to hand it over to Ethan to kind of talk through what those kind of 3 layers as we see them are. So Ethan, take us away here.
Awesome. Yeah. So as you mentioned, really wanted to hit on some of the big major ways that we can drive attribution and performance within the iOS platform. So just going left to right, we have the Apple Search Ads or ASA product within the Apple portfolio, StoreKit Ad Network, which we'll be talking more about today, and consented attribution. All of these have various pros and cons as you look across the set of features underneath of these. But the key element to this is currently these are the 3 best ways that you can start to drive your attribution across the iOS platform. So whether or not you're just launching your app within the App Store and you're looking for keyword search optimization to drive more downloads, leveraging Apple Search Ads to drive those specific downloads, and understanding then more of the attribution that you're getting through those. Some of the benefits are it's more real time by nature. So you're getting insights for your Apple Search Ads campaigns on the fly as users are downloading the apps. You're getting more of a device level report with that, as well as a keyword level. And obviously, because this is from the Apple Search or the Apple Store directly, it's available with and without the ATT option that we'll cover with consented attribution. StoreKit Ad Network has been around since iOS 14. Largely, there is some earlier versions that didn't have a lot of widespread adoption pre-iOS 14, but what we'll be covering more about today is the features such as the aggregated reporting that you're getting through SKAdNetwork, some of the insights that you can expect to get, albeit a little delayed from the actual action that took place from the user. You're not really seeing the device level or user level data, and it does require a SKAdNetwork registration with Apple directly. So really looking forward to some of the features that they've pushed out in SKAd 4.0, and we'll be covering those later on in the presentation. The last one is, I think the more traditional path that a lot of us are familiar with, which is consented attribution or deterministic attribution, leveraging the IDFA specifically. So, without consent, there is no IDFA. There is no way to do that deterministic matching for the users. Without consent, there is no probabilistic. When there is consent, you can have some exceptions around your owned media or first-party data that you have within the store itself. But one of the biggest pros of this framework is for the users that have opted in, you are getting that full insight into the row level data. So wide variety of different options for attribution. And on the next slide, we'll look at what this looks like out in the wild. So just a quick graph here that shows the spread of these different varieties of attribution that you can expect on the iOS platform. Big call out is you can see a big shift around April of 2021. And that is the really big release of iOS 14, where SKAd 2.0 was released, published, and a lot of the changes then took place around April, where we started to see 14.5 and ATT get rolled out to the market. So that shift away from IDFA and consented or unconsented data going into some of the different varieties of attribution that we can actually drive in the market. So a lot of that we saw shift up into the SKAdNetwork, as well as search ads across the iOS platform. But the other really interesting thing that we observed is a really big consolidation in market for first-party audiences with owned media. So really important call out that we'll hit on a couple times throughout this presentation is the need for owned media, how it impacts campaigns, how you can run owned media alongside your SKAd or search ad campaigns, and really maximize the performance and metrics that you're getting back from your users.
Hey, Ethan, probably a topic for a different webinar. In fact, we have one out there that you guys could go look at. If search ads, like this graph is showing, is also becoming a bigger part of your strategy and you are looking for assistance on how to better run those campaigns, we have a product called Search Ads Maven that'll do just that. So if you're interested, check it out.
Yep, absolutely. Great call out.
And this is the ad network distribution across SKAdNetwork, and I find very noteworthy here, right? The handful of super publishers that make up the majority of the volume. And Ethan, I'll hand it off to you with that. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a really good call out. So again, just looking at this graph, some really interesting observations that we can see, and we can have this data help kind of drive and inform what to expect as new versions of SKAdNetwork are released. Over to the left, we can see that we had a little bit of a spike on some early adopters and testing users across a variety of the different networks. But once that full release started to ramp up, we saw a disproportionate, breakdown of a lot of the super publishers coming into the space and where a lot of the SKAdNetwork signal was being captured. So for me, what this really means is really important to pay attention to the distribution of your campaigns across your partners. The consolidation and just ownership of audiences across various means and per network really means that you have to look at where you should be consolidating some of your ad spend, but also just really honing in on the performance of your individual campaigns, since there's some obfuscation around when you can receive SKAd signal through various audience thresholds that need to be met to receive data. So the more you can maximize your performance, the more meaningful you can leverage the SKAdNetwork data. Pairing that with a network that can drive demand and actually increase the downloads of your app is certainly critical.
Yeah, the other thing that I would add here is that as operating system changes take place with version updates, the adoption will continue to fluctuate. For example, I expect to see an increase here in the pretty near future as we're learning toggles on 16.1.1 are on by default to obfuscate IP, for example. So we expect to see subsequent fluctuations and subsequent changes, notably an increase likely here in the near future. So only highlights the important to have really good SKAD adoption, really embracing the solution that Apple's put forth as the mechanism to give marketing feedback regardless of consent.
Yeah, absolutely.
And looking at adoption of, prior versions of SKAdNetwork, maybe giving a slight window into what we might expect or not expect on V4. I know it kind of arrived a bit earlier than some had thought, including myself, with the late October, but Ethan, over to you.
Yeah, so, I think what's interesting about this is there was a wide variety of changes between SKAd 2.0 and 3 that we can't really take off the table as far as what we would expect to see from an SKAd adoption rate across the ecosystem. Again, one of the really big drivers was the rollout of ATT and some of the force upgrades that took place early on within the 14.0 release cycle. So while this graph is really showing that there is a steep adoption curve from 2.0 up to 3.0, we might not see that trend over time. I think what we are paying attention really closely to is referencing back the previous chart. When a specific super publisher integrates with SKAdNetwork, we can expect a large increase of the signal coming from Apple to be on the newest version from the conversion. So really pay attention with the support of the ad networks, work very closely with the ad networks to make sure that you're integrating properly with the different various SKAD versions, and you can expect to see those results from the downstream providers. So this is another really good call out. I think it highlights again the talking points that we've been having around that we may not see the same spike in switch from SKAd 2.0, 3.0, and now into to 4.0. This graph is showing the adoption rate from days since the release. So we can see that if we look back at the 14.4 release, up until about 18 days, we saw a drastic increase in adoption of that OS. And there's a lot of different reasons why that rollout happened the way it did, and what really drove users to adopt those new OS versions. And we might not see that directly with iOS 16 and 16.1. And what we've observed so far is a very similar growth path to what we saw with iOS 15. So again, we can see spikes in this. A lot of this is seasonal as well. There's a couple of really big holidays coming up, so we can expect to see potentially new devices hit the market that have iOS 16.1 or other pre-installed on the device. But so far, we're seeing a much more linear growth path that we've observed with other platforms, and we shouldn't expect to see that harsh drop off like we did with SKAd 2.0 to SKAD 3.0.
Yeah, and one of the questions, Ethan, that we've gotten as well in early registration is just around the notion of backward compatibility, and that we're going to live in this kind of 1 foot in V3 and eventually kind of this tiptoe, and then more of the foot in V4. And so thinking about, this is straight from Apple's own documentation about how the ads signature and how those ads are signed, whether it's V3 or V4, what the ripple effect of that is. So I don't know if you want to speak to just backward compatibility and how we're thinking about the rollout. Yeah,
absolutely. So, I think what Apple has provided is really straightforward on what we can expect from the ad network side, which is the key call out from this sentence. There's other documentation that shows what to expect if the ad network's using version 4. But it's really crucial to call out that it's dependent on the ad network signing the ad that's being displayed. So what you can see here is this is the guidance on what to expect when the ad sign is using version 3 or earlier. it really starts to do a breakdown between what the old postback and what the old conversion values are mapped to the new. So I won't read this line by line, but the key call out that is important for us to make is we should be expecting to see postbacks for SKAD 4.0 and the 4.0 format earlier than some of the adoption trends that we'll see. That's something that we can expect from just the downstream signaling side, and prioritizing around the ingestion of those new postbacks from SKAdNetwork and making sure that the fields are mapping correctly is really one of our highest priorities, to make sure that we can see that new data flowing in. We can help inform customers on what ad networks are using newer versions, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I'd love to open it up to Mark or Hamilton to comment on some of the other support mechanisms that we're looking at as we're seeing the rollout take place.
Yeah, I mean, that was a great summary. Hit on a lot of the points I was going to cover as well. But one additional point of reinforcement is our focus is to persist current functionality and present no breaking changes, no required updates from the advertiser side of things or the network side of things. So in application, one of the things that looks like is as we update our systems to ingest the new source ID, we know that we'll be receiving source ID alongside campaign ID and not both simultaneously. So we'll update our systems to make sure that we continue mapping to the partner parameters that get sent today. So as we receive partner and campaign information from Snapchat, for example, we'll still be able to correlate it based on the integers we receive, whether it's a source or a campaign ID, agnostic of version 3.4. So to Ethan's point, our focus is to make sure that we roll out our support in phases to make sure that there's no lost information when it's available from the ad network.
Yeah, and Hamilton, maybe specifically to you, one of the questions we've gotten is SDK, right? And as everyone knows, you have to update your SDK at some point because there's new APIs to be called. So that's not an option; it has to be done. But any comment on the availability, the timing, based on what the organization or any of our clients are looking for or need and their business plans?
Yeah, I have to believe that that's pretty top of mind for everybody on this call. When is Kochava Measurement going to support 4.0 so that you guys can plan around your own changes internally? We are working actively to figure out or close on the H1 23 roadmap. And by the end of this year, before we head out for the holidays, we're going to be communicating to all of our customers that timing so that you can work it into your plans for early next year. I don't believe anything that we come up with is going to catch you unaware. And I know there's some folks out there that are going to have windows, internal controls around when apps and the SDK integration can be updated. And so we'll want to work with you to support those internal constraints. If you're in that state, please reach out to your CSMs and let them know what your internal constraints are. And we'll do our best to incorporate those into the plans that we put out. So you'll hear more from us before we head out for the holidays.
It's a great call out. And I'm going to transition into this next slide. And Andrew Sorg, who's on our back end, doing some of the Zoom webinar ops here, if you'd like to throw up one of our first poll questions real fast. We kind of wanted to understand what the audience is most excited about in terms of new features coming with V4. And Hamilton, this is a slide from the first webinar back in August on SKAdNetwork 4.0. If you haven't seen it yet, we'll make sure to provide a link to that in the follow-up email as well, but it's on our website too. Certainly worth a watch because it covers some more foundational things. And obviously we're taking a deeper dive today on the new details. But I will let you kind of look through this slide here and speak to this in light of some of the changes that we've seen based on the new updates that came with 16.1.
Absolutely.
Blue boxes there, all yours.
Yeah. We led in with this slide in the last webinar because it's really great to start with the value that you get out of 4.0. Each one of these components are what we view as the biggest components, biggest value add that you get with 4.0. And like Jeff mentioned, there's lots more detail on the last webinar. For each one of these, there's new information that we've gotten from Apple with the actual release of 4.0. So that's what we're going to focus on in this webinar. I'm going to go left to right, and at a high level, we'll talk about it on this slide. And then in later slides, we'll dive into each. So we all know on the left-hand side that you're going to get longer visibility to post-install quality. And that's coming in the form of multiple conversions that you only get one today. And in previous versions, you're going to get 3 going forward, all the way up to 35 days past the install. That's going to give you this rich data set of what happens post-install from your campaigns. The 2 new components that you're going to get out of this value, 2 things. One, there's an update confirming that there will be delays that'll be intermixed into the delivery of that data. It's very similar to how it works today. Not a huge surprise. I think we speculated on it in the last conversation. But after that conversion window closes, there's going to be a variable time frame of when the information actually makes its way from Apple back to us. There's also going to be something called a lock window. And this is new as part of 4.0 that gives you some additional configuration around when you, within a window, fix in on the value, the conversion value that you actually want sent back for measurement. I'll talk more about that in a later slide. The second key component of value here is the multi-tiered privacy thresholds. So remember, the whole goal here that Apple has with SKAdNetworks is to provide anonymity to their customers, the device holder. Whereas previously we had absolute visibility into who that person was, and we could tie that to all their behavior online and offline. They want to provide us the ability to do similar kind of evaluation and improvement on our campaigns, but without providing us the detailed information of who is being exposed. That's their goal. And so what they realize is that if your exposure crowd grows to a certain size, the ability to identify anybody within that crowd becomes harder, and they can give you more information. And if your crowd isn't that big, they can still provide you some information. It just has to be more coarse-grained. So with the introduction of these tiers, you get the ability to, as an advertiser, receive as much information as possible to act on and improve your campaigns without sacrificing the anonymity of the device holder. In this section, the key information that we've received since this release is there used to be 3 tiers that we've talked about. There's a 4th tier, and Kellogg is going to get into more details about exactly what that tier is for. The next component of value is the more campaign attributes. So with these tiers, if you hit a certain volume, they can give you more details. By and large, that's going to come in the form of campaign attributes. Y'all are familiar with the campaign ID. It's a 2-digit number that comes in with SKAD in previous versions. That's going to change into a source ID, which is a 4-digit number. And that's going to give you just more information about your campaigns. You can allocate it in any number of ways that you want. So lots to learn on how we configure our campaigns, but you get more information ultimately is the bottom line. The 2 pieces of the real piece of information that's new here is that we're going to get, we have more information around when those digits are actually going to get sent to you. So Kellogg's going to walk through that one as well.
Yeah.
And then last, we've got expanded channel coverage. So we have been enjoying SKAD visibility when there's an app impression that leads to an app install. Now with this expanded coverage, web impressions that lead to an app install are going to be included. The new update, this was kind of the gut punch for me, was that it's only Safari. I had to go and look at it and figure it out and realize it's not that big of a deal. You're still going to get a bunch of additional information.
Yeah, and I jumped to that next slide for you. Thankfully, knowing that about 90+% market share is what we found for iOS devices using Safari over the other options of Chrome and Opera. And real quick too, before any talk track on this slide, I know we kicked off right at the top of the hour, so I'm seeing some great questions come through the Q&A. Just a reminder to those of you that may not have joined right at the outset, if you have questions, Mark Kellogg is faithfully manning our chat and QA, so feel free to submit them there, and thanks for chipping away at those, Mark. And then, yeah, back to you.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that 90% market share on iOS. The reality is we're talking about only iOS devices. This is SKAD for all reality. So that's the impact there. It's only on iOS, and Safari has a pretty big penetration on iOS. So anybody that's out there downloading specifically some other browser, maybe it's Chrome or Opera or some other browser on their device, and then using that over Safari, yeah, you're not going to get their traffic, but you will get Safari. And by our read off of what we can find, it's 90+% market share. Now, the key thing here is that traffic, that measurement, is going to work out of box as long as those ad networks are signing that traffic as 4.0. So as soon as that's happening, that traffic is going to come in through the same functionality thing, same ingest. It's going to be configured in the same way that you will for the app-to-app traffic. And it's going to work the same way on the actual SDK and within your app. So it should be just a gimme.
And just to add a quick point of how that will appear functionally is that while the Kochava SDK in a lot of your cases is controlling your current conversion value models, those same conversion value updates that we communicate to Apple will now be eligible for this new mobile web inventory, as this new mobile web inventory as it exists today because of the additional signed traffic. That is the kind of barrier to entry for this new web to app tracking. So you'll get the benefit of it, but it will still only be associated to your fine conversion values that we manage today up until the Kochava SDK is updated and starts managing the coarse conversion values as well. So I just wanted to add that point that you'll get some immediate benefit once Kochava's reporting is updated for the 4.0 signatures, and then subsequent value incrementally when we release our SDK and find a coarse value mapping that we will continue to kind of touch on throughout.
Yep. And now it might be a good point, Andrew, if you want to throw up the poll results from our first poll question. I noticed one thing that wasn't in the options was excitement over the SKAdNetwork for web ads, but that's because we're in Zoom and not Safari, so I couldn't put that on here. No, I'm kidding. I actually just forgot it. But this is a nice breakdown in terms of what things and new feature elements of SKAdNetwork v4 the audience is most excited about. So it looks like the 2 additional conversion postbacks and the source identifier mappings with partners. Obviously, before we were restricted to the 2-digit campaign identifier, and there was some unique creative mapping going on with different partners, but interesting to see this breakdown. I don't know if you have any thoughts on this at all, Ethan, Mark, or Hamilton on these outcomes, but this looks like this is what the audience is excited about most.
Yeah, I tried to submit my own answer to the poll and was upset that I wasn't able to. But the one that I'll share that I'm most excited about is the additional conversion postbacks. I think that as we're seeing more and more privacy come out and we want to see different trends that users are doing, those additional touch points are really crucial on figuring out the true LTV of what the users are doing within your apps. And that's going to be really crucial for optimizing the campaigns across iOS. So all in all, I'm super pumped with the SKAdNetwork 4.0 features, and that one specifically is one that's on my radar on some interesting things that we can do.
Yeah, I would agree with that sentiment. And it also, for me, is the biggest indicator that Apple took feedback from the market seriously, that it's not just one thing that indicates a user's value, that it's a series of them that is represented by a potential funnel. So definitely appreciate that update as well.
Yeah, I agree. I look at these and I know they're opinions, but I think it's the right answer.
Yeah.
All right, let's dive into multiple conversion postbacks. That's what people are really excited about. It does give us a much deeper visibility into the funnel post-install. So it's a big add. As you guys know, we have a postback 1, which is something that you're used to. Now we get postback 2 and 3. So you get to see the in-app activity that's taking place long after the install. We had mentioned that the new information here is delayed timers. So this is going to work pretty similarly to how it has in the past. After postback 1, you've got 24 to 48 hours before that data is going to arrive. For postback 2 and 3, it's going to be 24 to 144, which is a long time. It's almost a week. But the way we're thinking Apple is positioning this is that postback number 1 is really meant for real-time optimization of your campaign. You still have to wait for a little bit, but you're going to get it before the campaign's over, and you can feed that back in to optimize the way that you are real-time executing your campaign. Postback 2 and 3, remember, this is brand new data that you don't have in 3 or previous versions, so it's all net new. For a longer campaign, it might serve for a mid-campaign optimization. And for the shorter campaigns, it might be just more color to what happened during your campaign that has wrapped up so that you can position your next campaign with improvements. So that's how we're thinking about those delay timers. In addition, on these multiple conversions, we have the next slide around the lock window. So I mentioned this is new functionality to give you configuration around how you get data within those windows, those the postback windows. So in this case here, what we have is a lock window applied. It's happening 5 days after install within that second postback window. And what it means is that you get to a point where one of two things has happened. Either you've gotten the conversion value that you're really trying to drive with your campaign. Maybe it's a purchase. And at that moment, you've got what you want to measure. You've got what you wanted to affect with this campaign. So you're going to lock that value in so that you can measure specifically that activity. The other thing it does is it kicks off that timer for when you're going to get your data back. So plausibly, you're going to get it back sooner by kicking in that lock window before the end of your full postback window. You do it at the expense of visibility into the activity in the gray portion of that arrow, but that might not matter to you given the configuration and the objectives of your campaign. One thing to note is that lock window can be set for the various postbacks. This one is just represented in the second postback window, but it can be added to the third as well. And something else that was an interesting addition in 4.0 versus 3.0, Kellogg, correct me if I get this wrong. With 3.0, as you are setting more and more conversion values within a window, Apple will always take the highest conversion value that you've sent. That is the most important one. With 4.0, it's going to allow you to go up and down such that the last set value is what would actually be passed to Apple and then on through for measurement, unless you use the lock window at the moment of the event that you care most about, in which case it'll freeze it in time there. Kellogg, did I get that right?
Yeah. In other words, the update conversion value function can now be called in any order that is relevant to anyone who manages your SDK model. So at the moment, Kochava's logic is to increase the conversion value integer as we update that value as the funnel of events continue to increase or as that window extends, in other words. But as we produce updates or as we iterate on the product, that may or may not be the case as we see what the ecosystem has done, as we think about it from a product engineering perspective, as we think about it from a data science perspective, we may or may not utilize that new kind of functionality or quirk or update. So yeah, more to come on that one, but it's an important developer housekeeping call out.
Great. Yeah, from a product perspective, I mean, I know you guys need value out of your advertising campaign measurement so that you can do a better job advertising. But from a product perspective, I'm really excited to visualize this data and see what new things we can learn.
Yeah, and I know there's some, there was a question that we had noted as we'll answer live, and there was a follow-up to that about crowd anonymity, and we're about to kind of dive into that a bit further. But there's this question from Joey Mueller, which I think is the perfect one to tackle right now with this image on the screen. So the question is, no changes to the attribution window of install, ? Install must happen within 0 to 2 days of ad event, i.e. click or ad view. I think I can't remember what the exact windows are, but these windows for these, quote unquote conversion windows, in my understanding, are uniquely different than the attribution windows for SKAdNetwork. I think if an ad impression occurs, I think it's 24 hours. If it's a click, it's up to, I think, 30 or more days in certain cases, where once the user's done that and gone to the store and gotten the app, they have a wide window of days to actually launch that app and still be considered attributable to that ad interaction. So this isn't saying that the install can only be attributed if there's only 0 to 2 days between that click or view and the install itself. And I don't know if either one of you want to expound upon that further and clarify with any other commentary.
Yeah, Yeah, Kellogg, I'm actually interested in your commentary here. The punchline here is that the attribution, the impression action, that's actually happening to the left of this timeline and is not represented here. The 0 to 2 days is from the moment of install. Attribution has already happened, but I don't know the rules, Kellogg, around attribution. Do you know offhand how that is being handled?
Not with absolute clarity from Apple, no.
Jeff, let's capture that as a next step and make sure we get that out in the notes post conversation. It's a great question.
And I'll try and find that because I know I've stumbled across that part of the support doc before, which is the attribution timeframes. And I'll see if I can find that while we're chatting here, and we can bring it back up in a moment. But I definitely know, yeah, the answer to that question is no, it's not represented here. It happens left of that install icon. All right, so crowd anonymity. There's a couple of questions that were bouncing around. So let's get to that. I think one of the questions, not the exact wording here, but was essentially, do we think that the new addition of these tiers is going to allow for essentially more data than was previously shared when we had effectively a one-size-fits-all privacy threshold in V3 and prior, right? Versus now we have this multi-tiered crowd anonymity, which our team always loves trying to say that like 5 times fast because it's quite a tongue twister. Mark, do you want to take away and give your thoughts on that?
Yeah, sure. And I'll do my best to answer it directly, but I hope to cover it indirectly here as we talk through what crowd anonymity is, what it means, and how it might apply to app developers. So the first thing to note is that the SKAd4 privacy thresholds, they can be thought of as non-binary, whereas pre-4 can be thought of as binary. It seemed like, and Apple never specified or clarified what the thresholds were. We're all well aware of that, often painfully well aware of that, but they seem to be binary, right? Either you hit a number and then data was available, or if you were below that number, the data was not available. It was a binary type of interaction or engagement. So what the SKAd4 update appears to do is to make that dynamic. They make it dynamic in that now the threshold appears to, and they go so far as to clarify this in their documentation, is that it will be a combination of the various values. The source ID will have an impact over the conversion values and vice versa, and the availability will be determined by Apple privacy-based algorithms that continue to prevent a user from being reverse engineered or identified outside of the consent framework. So initially in the WWDC announcement, when Apple released the SKAd4 details, they said there will be privacy thresholds based on designations of low, medium, and high. What we've come to learn in this new SKAd4 release notes, the presentation of the tech specs, if you will, is that they have broken out the high categorization into 2 tiers, represented here by tier 2 and 3. And the tier 2 and 3 that make up the high bucket, they do not vary between 2 of the values, but they impact one value significantly. We'll go into each one of those here, but I did want to call out that one final note regarding the thresholds, this may touch on the question also, is we heard initial rumors that smaller developers would have access to lower thresholds, but at this time we really don't have any indication that that's the case from Apple doing so. So let's look at each individual value as impacted by crowd anonymity. The first one we'll touch on specifically is source app ID. Jeff, can you go forward 1 slide, please? Thank you.
Yeah.
So the source app ID, this is the individual value, the specific value that we see as impacted by the separation of that high crowd anonymity value. The only time that the source app ID is available today, it's still based on the binary thresholds. Either there's a threshold met or the threshold has not been met, meaning the source app ID will be available or it won't be. In the new SKAd4 framework, the only time it will be available is in the first postback, meaning that first 2-day window that Hamilton went through. It's the only time that it will be available, and it will only be available at the highest volume through crowd anonymity. Otherwise, it won't be available. That is a change from the current operation. It seems like the source app ID may even decrease in its availability. There could have been some research, some feedback some information that led Apple to break apart the source app ID specifically from low, medium, and high. So we landed at this conclusion based on the next slide, which relates to the conversion value and at what point it will be available. If you look at tier 2 and 3 in this grid, they're the same, right? So this could now, 2 and 3 could be consolidated back into high for the purposes of the digestion of this information. And tier 1 is medium and tier 0 is low. So no change here from the previous presentation, but the way that you can think about these conversion values is the fine is still only available within the first 2 days of that conversion taking place, still subject to the same timers. And then the course conversion value updates, which again, Kochava will release support for in H1 next year. And we will keep you posted, as Hamilton mentioned, on those releases. But you'll get the benefit of the course conversion values in the postback as those updates are released from us.
Yeah.
And then the last value that is impacted by the new crowd anonymity logic is the source identifier. And again, we see here that tier 2 and 3 match. Apple may change this, they may release an update to this, but at the moment they still match. So again, no initial changes from where Apple rolled out SKAD 4 in the announcement in WWDC, meaning that only the first 4 digits will be available when crowd anonymity is high in the first postback. Otherwise, it's 2 digits available when it's medium or high as it relates to crowd anonymity. So there's a lot of nuance here. It's not very straightforward if you focus on the logic itself. The important thing to keep in mind here is that Kochava's focus and our release prior to our SDK release will be to ingest all these source ID values and map them to the partner campaign values and make them available to you as they are today. So that's our focus is looking at the highest priorities from a customer point of view and building those into the platform as soon as possible. Hamilton or Ethan, anything you would add to crowd anonymity before we summarize?
I think the only thing to specifically call out is what you've covered here, which is really focusing in on that 0 to 2 day window to unlock the fine-grained values that can come back. So as you're going through and planning out your conversion models and figuring out what metrics points you want to leverage in order to hit those thresholds, you really need to think about the user journey and the user experience that's coming in to make sure that you can hit those high funnel events that are coming across. So more to come on that, but really just calling out that those first 2 days are really important from a user engagement and tracking standpoint to be able to get up to those higher thresholds within tier 3 and 2.
Yep. Yeah. The other quick call out I'm just noticing here, I think is worth reinforcing is the potential source identifier mapping on the right. We have definitions of those below the particular digit. Those may or may not be where those land. Those are based on ecosystem feedback. Those are based on chatting with partner and channels to say, how do you plan on accommodating or utilizing these additional 2 digits? So those are up for change at any given moment. Apple, in fact, made it clear to say those can be used for anything, but those are the most common potential use cases that we have seen today. So just wanted to call that out, that that is represented only by theory, not by practice at this point.
Yeah, and a point to that too, I mean, just to clarify, unfortunately, that's not something the advertiser gets to choose, right? This is on the ad network or publisher side where they are the ones that will denote this mapping, right? It's not something that you can, as an advertiser, control and request one thing with, for one campaign and something else for another. Is that accurate?
That's correct. Yeah, when the ad is signed by the ad network, they set the source ID. Only the crowd anonymity will determine how much Apple makes available in the conversion postback. So it's always signed with the 4 digits. It is generally up to the ad network of what they sign it with. But I would imagine that the advertiser ecosystem will have the opportunity, or they'll have a feedback mechanism to make sure the ad network is at least takes into account the feedback or how the advertiser reports or optimizes. There's a lot of flexibility based on what Apple released here, but also there seems to be the opportunity for ecosystem consensus because the number of channels are relatively few if you look at market share distributed across. So
yeah,
I do expect consensus.
I did want to harken back to that answer I promised to find and bring back up here. So this is from Apple's documentation around ad attributions, but this is the look back windows essentially. If you think about, some we've talked about, distinct from conversion windows, which happen after the install and control those post backs. So it looks like when the ad network presents a StoreKit ads, that's essentially a click, right? The user has 30 days to install the app at that point. If it's a view only, so view through ad, 24 hours to install the app. Attributable web app is 30 days to install. And then separately from that, I guess they can install, not launch the app, because there's this other line here that says the user has 60 days to launch the app. So I suppose there's that notion of the StoreKit has the registrations of the ad taking place. The user installed, hasn't launched yet. They can up to 60 days later finally launch the app, and there's still going to be attribution there to that original window of time between ad and just installing the app, not necessarily launch. Anything else you would add to that, Ethan, Hamilton, or Mark?
Nope. I think that's great that you found it and aligns with what we've been thinking on a lot of this stuff. And I think that the really big key call outs are also then the separation that we've hit on with the conversion value postbacks and what to expect from that. So again, just kind of tying into those different separations on what to expect from the signaling, but I think it's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, thanks for finding that, Jeff. Before we
I was trying to remember what those were, and I was like, let me go find it. I don't want to just spew forth and say the wrong thing.
Before we depart the slide, I will touch on a question that got asked in the Q&A. It's a good question. So the benefits from our perspective are a couple fold. Ultimately, the advertiser or app developer is the one out marketing their product, getting distribution. So the benefit ultimately will be derived and driven by that cohort of folks. But from our eyes, the benefit of standardization is largely a function of objectively comparing channel performance. And then the second one, from selfishly, we can build better product the more standardized that it is. We can build better visualizations, better data models. So the more it can be standardized, the more useful I believe it will be. But we'll see what the ecosystem decides to do. But we'll obviously build to accommodate anything.
Yep. It's a great call out. I'll jump to this. This slide is really easy on the eyes. I know some folks have probably seen variations of this before when we were looking at just trying to convey essentially a pivot table / grid of attribution options for, at this point there's 14 is in here too a little bit, iOS 14, but if we think about 16 plus and once V4 for SKAdNetwork's in place and the new options with web to app support with Safari. I don't know if you want to talk through this, Mark, in any further detail, and then Ethan, just something I know we want to make sure we cover off on is that notion of owned media and making sure you're factoring that into your SKAdNetwork measurement strategy, so you're getting credit, not just in maybe deterministic or probabilistic attribution you can do on an MMP side, but through the Apple rails of SKAdNetwork as well.
Yeah, I won't go into too much detail, but do want to highlight two particular items here and their changes from the previous presentation that we did a few months ago now. So the first change is we broke out the Apple Search Ads channel. So this is an interesting channel because it's unique in that all of the information that Kochava has on your behalf is deterministic. That is unique in that isn't ubiquitous across the ecosystem of iOS users. We have the ability to report deterministically, but anonymously through the Apple Search Ads channel, through the ad services framework that Jeff has noted here. We submit a token on your behalf and we get an attribution response from that token. You can almost think of it like if Kochava submitted your Google Click ID to an API and got an attribution response. It's an attribution token versus a device ID. because Apple's the operating system, they have the ability to generate that token and make sure it's ephemeral. So that's a really unique channel. It's a great way to get deterministic feedback that's privacy safe. And it still is subject to the ATT framework in that if you do happen to have consent at the time the token is submitted, Apple will return the click time of that user's click time. If not, there will be no click time, and Kochava applies a click time based on the logic that you have configured in the UI. So I wanted to separate that channel amongst the rest because it's unique. The second one is the call out here for mobile web, web to app support. I want to be specific. That is added. So calling that out here is that row has also been added from the previous slide. So those are the two items I wanted to mention here, Jeff.
Thanks, Mark. Those are good call outs. And even Ethan, on the own media front, anything you would add?
Yeah, no, I think, you hit on some of it for the most part, but for me, it's just really about making sure that signal clarity for owned media is either coming in with your SKAD data, or you have clarity in isolating out your owned media strategy to make sure that you're not getting competing signals across SKAd and owned media. I think that becomes more and more important as we start to see more channels coming into SKAd, where in this latest release, we see the web to app also being added in. So that could be, an avenue where you historically would see more data being driven from an owned media standpoint on getting interaction for the installs to be taking place. So whether or not you're running owned media through specific ad networks that you're running with or hosting that yourself, I think it's really up to the individual to figure out how they want to see that data funnel through with the rest of the SKAD data. My recommendation, to get a signal truth coming through the same various means, would be to make sure that your owned media is flowing in with your SKAD 4.0 signal to make sure that you're getting that live campaign information through that framework as well, and not as an addition to potentially what owned media could be doing. Otherwise, it looks like the two are pretty competing in that signal clarity. So that's something I think is a really big trend, especially as we continue to see more and more app consolidation and kind of the drive for first party data ownership with a lot of these different apps. And I think this really highlights the different things that you can expect from those attribution platforms based off consent, Apple search ads, or leveraging SKAd and its various media channels.
Yeah, those are great call outs. And as we jump into some open kind of Q&A time here, Andrew, on the back end there, would you mind throwing up the second poll question to the audience here? Just want to get kind of a gauge of sense of urgency from those in attendance on their adoption of SKAdNetwork v4. And any kind of like conclusive thoughts, Ethan, Hamilton, Mark, on anything we didn't cover specifically in the slides?
Yeah, I'll just say that SKAD 4.0, at least on the outset and without having tested it in excruciating levels of detail, it seems objectively better, meaning that there is more information available across the board. It's a bit more nuanced. It's a bit more complicated to manage. Your partners like Kochava will have a bit more work to do as it relates to making sure that we provide the best model to best leverage this new information. But objectively, I believe it's a better iteration than SKAD 3. So we're happy to support it. We're happy to take feedback. But yeah, that's kind of a parting thought from me.
Yeah, I would definitely piggyback on that and say, it has been nice to see the rapid improvements to SKAdNetwork that are coming through, especially around what type of metrics points that we can get from their platform. So that's really cool. And I think that, for me, it's a service that you, if you haven't, that you definitely want to adopt. This isn't something that I think we can continue to just keep at arm's length and say, well, here's X percentage of ATT opt-in users. Let's continue down that path. I think this is more of a shift in the advertising ecosystem, and we're seeing this pattern across multiple different platforms, and getting management of data into this pattern and understanding the metrics points that we can analyze from that signal is a really good thing to get started on. So we hit on it a lot of times. I'm really looking forward to being able to get more post-back signals. I called that out, and that's specifically to look into what we can do based on a modeling standpoint, post that data coming in for the ad campaign spend on the iOS platform. So, a lot of this stuff, I think, gets us back into a spot where we can really narrow down focus and do more campaign optimization and trust the signal that we're getting from the SKAdNetwork more holistically. So excited for the changes, and also the ability to dive into some of the source identifier mapping is a really neat opportunity. My biggest advice would be to continue to make sure that you're really thinking about the crowd anonymity tiers and making sure that you're not over spreading campaigns across these various networks, to make sure that we can hit those thresholds. And I'll still say the more data that we can get early on, the better signal that we can get more reactively earlier on within the funnel of a user. So keeping that in mind as you're making some big campaign spend changes is something that I would definitely recommend, and doing more of a gradual build out on some of the source identifier mappings that we can, to make sure that we're seeing that actual performance across those campaigns is pretty crucial.
Yeah, I would say a lot of the same things. I think that you guys put it really well. As more of your signal shifts to anonymous, this window into analyzing your campaigns become so much more important. So I think that's 100% true. And I completely agree, Kellogg, that this is a step forward. This is an improvement. I feel like with the first couple of iterations of SKAD, they really hammered their goal of anonymity for their customers. And I think these subsequent releases are getting them to a better balance of keeping that anonymity, but providing as much information for advertisers to optimize their campaigns and connect with their customers in a meaningful way. So totally agree with what Ethan and Mark said.
Yeah, and just to reiterate, Mark, thanks for answering Q&A and in the chat here. And I know there was that question again. I think it's important to just reiterate around, should we expect more basic volume, than we did with V3 and prior, thanks to the availability of the coarse grain values. And I think, obviously with V3 and prior, right, not with V1, because the conversion value wasn't introduced until V2. But it was again, one size fits all privacy threshold that nobody really knows exactly what that number was. And then in addition to that, it was either the quote unquote fine grained or the existing conversion value or a null value. So just empty. So the fact that we now have these different levels of crowd anonymity, and we have the coarse value as a fallback for when the fine value can't be shared, I totally agree that we should see fewer instances of null conversion values, and hopefully that just means more insights for marketers. And I guess one thing that, oh, go ahead. Do you want to say anything, Ethan?
No, I was just going to double down and say I agree, and I think pointing back towards just the trend with the multiple post-back conversions, again, that is meant to help capture a lot more of the audience post some of those initial engagements. So whether or not you're receiving that incrementally for each postback, that's a lot of the stuff that we want to see within the testing. But it appears to be the goal of the coarse grain value that we can see as more signal clarity on the campaign coming across. So I think that just an overall blanket statement to say that yes, we should expect to see fewer nulls coming across and more data based on that. Really interested to see what it means for various sizes of the publishers. Mark hit on that earlier, whether or not it's a little bit more dynamic based on audience size, but those are things that we'll be observing in market and looking forward to reporting back on.
Yeah.
If I were to take a guess, this is maybe optimistic, but I feel like the data you're going to get in fine grain is going to be what you're getting today in 3.0. And so I think that that's kind of the level that you can think of, and everything else is just gravy. That kind of feels consistent with what I'm seeing through all of the other different things that they're adding on. But again, maybe I'm being optimistic.
That's a good thing.
I would agree.
Otherwise, it's hopeless. No. Well, good. I always like to be respectful of everyone's time. So with that, I know we're literally a minute away from the top of the 11 o'clock hour, at least here on US Pacific time. So we tried to cover a lot here. I know there's probably still some, I see you answering a question right now, Mark. You can get it in under the wire. But again, follow us on Twitter, on Facebook, on LinkedIn. We have ongoing updates that we always post there. And then looking at poll question 2 and the response here, it looks like we have a pretty even spread between those that have a high, medium, and or low kind of sense of urgency around implementing SKAdNetwork 4.0. So we'll be keeping in touch, submitting updates as soon as we have them. And again, if you have questions around your strategy in particular and the needs of your business based on SDK implementation windows, dev sprints, things like that, reach out to your CSM or contact support@kochava.com, and we will work with you. And if you don't use Kochava and you are struggling with SKAdNetwork to date or haven't used it at all yet, please reach out. We would be happy to help you get on board and understand how it all works. So with that, thank you, Ethan, Hamilton, Mark, and thanks, Andrew, in the background for all your efforts. And have a great day or evening, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone. See ya.